You're listening to the Vocabbett podcast, where I help students improve their vocabulary for the SAT, ACT, and life itself using my unique and research-backed story-based method. On this podcast, I'm sharing the best tips and tricks for a more enriched vocabulary and pain-free test day. Welcome to episode 3 of the Vocabbett podcast. I'm your host, Erica Abbott, a former English and history teacher, the author of the young adult novel Ahead of Her Time, and the founder of the vocabulary company Vocabbett. So I kind of hate it when I press play on a podcast and then I start driving or folding laundry or whatever, and the host's dulcet tones pop out and ask me to go tune into a different episode to get the backstory for whatever they're talking about. If you haven't listened to episode number 346 yet, they'll say, start there and then come back here. And I'm like, I'm going 70 miles an hour on the tollway right now. I do not have time to go find episode number 346. So can you just tell me whatever it is I need to know? So that's what I'm going to do for you now. In the last episode, I went over how my method works, and there are basically 2 things that I want to reiterate. The first is that storytelling is a uniquely effective and relatively painless vocabulary acquisition tool. The second is that if you encounter a word 8 times, you're statistically pretty likely to remember it. Now, you can get those 8 impressions through flashcards and conventional learning methods, or you can encounter those words incidentally, just randomly hearing them, reading them, whatever. And your brain, whether you encountered that word 8 times at school or, just reading something funny in a comic book, whatever, either way, your brain is going to catalog that impression and it's going to count towards your 8 that you need. I actually argue that second way, just incidentally encountering these words, is actually your brain's preferred method because it's really how you learned the majority of your native language. It's the same reason that if you want to learn a foreign language, people always say that immersion is the best way to do that. And that's because through immersion, you're able to continue learning language the same way that you originally did. And I mean, when you think about it, improving your English vocabulary, it's just learning a bunch of words, right? It's no different than learning a foreign language. So my method, trying to incidentally give you those 8 impressions, it's kind of like immersion, but with English. So I'm really excited about this because we are now going to start transitioning away from the methodology and how Vocabbett works. And I'm actually going to show you with a story. I'm going to read you a fun little story that has nothing to do with etymology or linguistics. It's just going to have those incidental impressions, but it's about something totally random. This story, I think anyone who likes Percy Jackson or Greek mythology, I think you'll really get a kick out of it. The story is about the Greek goddess Hera, and it's in modern times, and she's getting called in to the principal's office of her son's school, her mortal son's school, after he gets into trouble. I actually wrote this story as part of an assignment, for my master's degree. So the teacher, we knew that we were going to have to write a story on the spot. The teacher comes into the classroom, and he gives us a quote. And the quote was, "Those whose house is shaken by the gods escape no form of doom." And he said, okay, you have until the end of the class to write a story that somehow incorporates this quote. And by the way, before you leave, you have to read it to everyone. So this is the story that I wrote around that. I actually really enjoyed it. I think it was really fun. If you want to read along, this story is available in print form at Vocabbett. You can read along with it. I will link to it in the show notes, or you can go to Vocabbett, VOCABBETT, like my last name, /post/podcast3. I've included definitions of all of the vocabulary words at the bottom of the page. That way you can appreciate that story a little bit more in real time before you've logged all 8 of those impressions. But either way, the story is going to be valuable for you because it has 21 potential SAT words in it. And so it's going to give you one of your 8 impressions to 21 new words. Without further ado, here is Hera and the Headmaster. Hera and the Headmaster, a vocabulary-boosting short story. Hera dressed herself in only the finest. In ancient times, her perfectly proportioned frame was clad exclusively in gossamer robes, her hair a model of artful dishabille. Today, her long legs were encased in designer jeans, her previously barefoot toes squeezed into Christian Louboutins. Naturally, her lustrous hair was professionally blown out. But as the goddess of marriage and motherhood entered the double doors of Sunset Preparatory Academy, she began to regret her choice of footwear. It wasn't that they were too tight, too high, or any such mortal complaint. Hera waved away such discomfort with a flick of her dainty fingers. No, it was the incessant click, click, click they made as she walked the school's wide, polished hallway. Ye gods, half the pantheon of Mount Olympus would know she was here before she made it to the headmaster's office. Despite her status as the goddess of motherhood, Hera didn't much care for children. She had only a handful of the creatures with her husband Zeus, loftily shunning mortal company for millennia. Her brothers and sisters had no such class. They regularly dropped to earth in a shower of golden coins, or, to Hera's eternal puzzlement, manifested themselves as animals to woo easily impressed mortals. Snotty faces notwithstanding, Hera wouldn't mind a few hundred of the petulant creatures around right now. Their screams and infernal energy would provide a lovely bit of camouflage. But they were all in class, staring vacantly at laptops or doodling in their notebooks. Mercifully, Hera made it to the headmaster's office without a chariot of her siblings swooping down from the sky. When she entered, Mr. Thompson was typing away at his standing desk. "Ah, Mrs. Coletus," he said with a forced smile. "So nice to finally meet you. Please, have a seat." He gestured to the shiny wooden table and chairs on the other side of his office. Hera stood in the doorway a moment, looking at the headmaster. He was middle-aged and entirely forgettable. This balding specimen of humanity wouldn't dare challenge her. "Why have you summoned me?" Hera glided into the room, taking the seat he offered. "Coffee? Tea?" Mr. Thompson asked, coming to join her. "No, and my time is valuable, so—" "I understand," Mr. Thompson nodded. "It's young Andreas. There's been another fight at recess." Hera raised a carefully shaped brow. "Fight? Who died?" "Well, no one," Mr. Thompson said, puzzled. "Can't have been much of a fight." "Mrs. Coletus." Mr. Thompson shifted uncomfortably in his chair. "Another student cut Andreas in the lunch line, and Andreas pushed him down. This other student has been quite anxious around Andreas since, and our school takes physical violence very seriously. I'm afraid we're going to have to ask Andreas to leave. Permanently." Hera sat very still. "Expelled?" she asked in a tight-lipped smile. "Our school has a 3-strike policy. The administration had no choice." "I believe, sir, that there is always a choice." Hera's voice had an edge to it that made the headmaster want to hide behind the potted plant in the corner of the room. "It is my choice, for instance, to dispense grants with a lavish hand to the school my son attends. If Andreas is no longer a student here—" Thompson steeled himself. The other teachers had made it clear that Andreas had to go, munificent mother and all. The boy had already gotten into a mountain of mischief in his paltry year at Sunset Prep. It's just that he was so wily, it was impossible to definitively pin most of it on him. "We've already drawn up the paperwork." Mr. Thompson retrieved the document from his desk drawer, then slid it across the table to the goddess of marriage and motherhood. Hera's manicured fingers tightened around the Hermes bag on her lap. She wasn't even supposed to have children with mortals. How would it look when everyone found out she'd betrayed her oath to Zeus, and the offspring was a failure to boot? Hera took a deep breath, already plotting her next move. But before moving on, she decided to show a certain headmaster the folly of interfering with a deity, and a notoriously vindictive one at that. Hera reached for the pen, signing her pseudonym with such force that the dot of the I tore the page. Rising, she left Mr. Thompson with a wicked smile and a threat that he would ponder for years to come. "I warn you, sir, those whose house is shaken by the gods escape no form of doom." All right, I really hope you enjoyed that short story. I know I had a lot of fun writing it. You logged another impression of 21 vocabulary words, and hopefully it wasn't too arduous. So this week I dropped a podcast Wednesday, Thursday, and Friday. I wanted to do kind of back to back to back to establish a little bit of momentum. But starting next week, I will start to come back regularly on Tuesdays and Thursdays. So the next 2 podcasts will be similar to this. I'm going to read you guys a fun little short story from Vocabbett. And yeah, I think you're really going to like it. Subscribe to this podcast to make sure that you don't miss anything. And if you enjoy it, please leave it a 5-star review. It really helps push it to the front and help other people find it and benefit from it. So thank you so much. I will talk to you guys on Tuesday.